"Hands off the lady." The words didn't echo through the chandelier-lit ballroom like a shout. They cut through it like a blade. In a room filled with diamonds, designer gowns, and champagne laughter, everything froze. For men had surrounded a woman in emerald silk, their shadows closing in like wolves circling prey. And then he stepped forward, a quiet man in a simple navy suit, a father first, a warrior once, and the night changed forever. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable story, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe in kindness, courage, and second chances. Stories like this remind us that real heroes don't wear capes, they stand up when it matters most. The charity gala was meant to celebrate success. Crystal chandeliers dripped golden light over polished marble floors. The city's most powerful names mingled beneath orchestral music, raising money for children's hospitals and speaking about compassion with glasses of imported wine in hand. At the center of it all stood Vanessa Laurent, the brilliant CEO whose tech empire had reshaped the industry. She was poised, intelligent, admired, and painfully alone in a room full of people. No one noticed the man standing near the back wall. Daniel Hayes didn't look like the rest. He wasn't scanning the room for investors or photographers. His attention was on his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, who clutched his hand tightly. She wore a simple white dress, her blonde hair falling in soft waves, her eyes wide as she took in the glittering spectacle. For Daniel, the gala wasn't about networking. It was about teaching Lily that even after loss, you still show up to life. Daniel had once been a Navy SEAL. Years of silent missions, impossible odds, and brothers who never came home had carved discipline into his bones. But the toughest battle he'd ever faced wasn't overseas. It was in a hospital room 3 years earlier, holding his wife's hand as cancer stole her breath. Since then, his world had narrowed to one mission: raise Lily with strength and kindness. Vanessa didn't know Daniel. She barely knew anyone personally anymore. Success had cost her more than she admitted. Her company's rapid rise had attracted powerful enemies, men who smiled in boardrooms and schemed in private. Tonight, one of those rival executives had decided humiliation would be his revenge. The music softened as Vanessa stepped aside to take a call near the balcony doors. That was when the 4 men approached her. Expensive tuxedos. Smug expressions. One blocked her path. Another leaned too close. A third grabbed her wrist under the guise of drunken clumsiness. The 4th laughed loudly, making sure people watched, but no one intervened. Across the room, Lily noticed first. Children see what adults pretend not to. She tugged her father's sleeve, her small voice trembling as she pointed. Daniel followed her gaze. In one glance, he assessed everything: Vanessa's stiff posture, the predatory smirks, the tightening circle. His breathing slowed. The room seemed to shrink. Years of training returned not as rage, but as clarity. He moved Lily gently behind him and walked forward. When he said, "Hands off the lady," it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. One of the men laughed and shoved him. Another swung a careless punch, assuming that single dad was an easy target. They were wrong. Daniel moved with controlled precision. The first attacker was disarmed with a swift wrist lock and guided to the floor before he understood what happened. The second lunged and found himself flipped over Daniel's shoulder, crashing into a table of champagne flutes. The third attempted to grab from behind but was neutralized with a sharp elbow and pinned effortlessly. The 4th, angrier and less sober, charged recklessly, and was dropped with a single calculated strike that ended the chaos in seconds. It wasn't brutality. It was efficiency. Gasps filled the ballroom. Phones lowered. The orchestra had stopped playing. In the sudden silence, Vanessa stood frozen, one hand covering her mouth in shock. She had spent years commanding boardrooms, negotiating billion-dollar deals, but no one had ever stepped in for her like that. Not without expecting something in return. Daniel didn't pose. He didn't glare. He simply turned back to Lily, crouched down, and asked if she was okay. Security rushed in late, of course. The 4 men were escorted out, their arrogance replaced with humiliation. Whispers rippled across the room. Some guests looked embarrassed for not acting sooner. Others stared at Daniel with newfound respect. Vanessa approached him slowly. Her heels echoed against the marble as she stood before the man who had just risked everything in a room full of powerful witnesses. She saw no hunger for attention in his eyes. Only calm. In that moment, something shifted inside her. She learned later who he was, a retired SEAL who had declined media interviews, who lived modestly, who volunteered at veteran centers, who spent every spare moment raising his daughter. She also learned he had been quietly working nights as a security consultant to make ends meet. The next morning, Vanessa made a decision that surprised her board. Daniel was offered a position as head of security for her entire corporation. Not because he could fight, but because he understood responsibility. He understood protection. He understood loyalty. At first, Daniel hesitated. Pride and independence had carried him this far. But Lily's school tuition, the mortgage, the quiet weight of being both mother and father, those realities softened him. He accepted, not for glory, but for stability. Months passed, and the gala incident became legend in quiet circles. But the real transformation happened behind closed doors. Vanessa began spending time with Lily, discovering the warmth she had long buried beneath corporate armor. Daniel found purpose beyond survival. He trained young recruits not just in defense tactics, but in integrity. Vanessa restructured company policies to ensure stronger protections for women in executive spaces. The night that began in fear had sparked something larger: accountability, courage, community. For Vanessa, it was the first time she felt truly seen as a person rather than a title. For Daniel, it was proof that strength and gentleness could coexist. For Lily, it was a lesson she would carry forever: real heroes step forward when others step back. If this story is touching your heart right now, please take a moment to like the video and share your thoughts below. Your engagement helps stories like this reach people who need to believe that goodness still exists. And before we close, I have a special request. Comment, "True courage protects," if you believe standing up for someone is the greatest form of strength. Years later, when Lily was old enough to understand that night fully, she asked her father if he had been afraid. Daniel smiled softly and admitted that he had. Courage, he explained, isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that someone else's safety matters more than your comfort. Vanessa would often replay that moment in her mind, the calm voice cutting through noise, the steady stance between her and danger. In a world obsessed with power, it was the quiet man at the back of the room who reminded everyone what real power looked like. It looked like restraint. It looked like sacrifice. It looked like a father teaching his daughter that kindness is not weakness, and protection is love in action. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is 4 simple words spoken at the right time. Hands off the lady.